Welcome to What Do Siblings Talk About?
I'm Jacob,
And I'm Veronica.
and we're siblings.
Yay.
Hello, everyone. We're back. This is episode. Do you remember? 6?
6, 7? I've lost track already.
It's when you get this deep into recording that you start to lose track of how many episodes there have been.
We're already so famous and accomplished. It's just all a wash.
That's right. Life just comes at you fast sometimes. So this is episode 6, and in this episode, it's a cultural hot topic, the food discourse. So I came across she describes herself as a food activist, Vani Hari. Food activism is not a field I keep myself apprised of, really. So I had not heard of her before, but I heard her do a fairly lengthy interview on a podcast series I sometimes listen to, and it piqued my interest a little bit. I think Vani Hari is an interesting person to talk about potentially, as well as our thoughts, yours and mine, Veronica, on the food discourse. So do you want to give a brief intro on what you know about this person, if you know anything about this person, and also if you have any personal background you want to share about where you're sort of starting from?
Sure. So I don't know much about her other than just occasionally hearing her name sort of banding around in different circles. So yeah, don't really know a whole lot about her work or even her position. I guess so my own background, I did a lot of research into someone called Weston Price starting in high school, who he was actually a dentist from about 100 years ago, Canadian dentist. And he sort of started this movement into returning to very, I guess you would call it now, like ancestral ways of eating and preparing food. So he went around the world and studied all these tribes and was basically like, well, these people in the Amazon, this is what they're eating and they're incredibly healthy. And, these people in American Samoa, this is what they're eating and they're incredibly healthy. So he wrote this, he sort of started this movement of, let's stop eating processed food and go back to what people were eating for thousands of years, which seemed to work pretty well for those people. So yeah, like I said, I sort of started getting into that a little bit in high school. And I think that's informed a lot of my thinking about food and dietary choices since then. Just this idea that we should maybe move away from a lot of the man-made stuff and processed stuff that has come about in the last 50 or 100 years and try to go back to sort of a simpler, pure way of eating stuff.
Yeah, so I think we can definitely point this trend line back to the start of the Industrial Revolution, which basically starts in the early 1800s, first really in Scotland and then the rest of the British Isles, before spreading internationally. But that has largely coincided with an explosion of the worldwide population, because for the first time it was possible to make food abundant and available. But there's been obviously knock-on effects of that. I think the food discourse today is kind of coming to grips with where we are now. Mm-hmm. One thing I do want to observe about, you brought up Weston Price, whom I had not heard about before, is multivariate versus single factor analysis. The one thing I will note about looking at places where people have significantly different diets or longer term diets is another thing that was also coming to light, I think in the same general period, kind of through the early and middle 20th century, is genetic differences between populations, and how that can also have a tremendous role on health, and what foods are going to make for the best health outcomes. So that's just something I would throw out there. But I think both of us want to have a kind of a broad discussion around what is good food. So to share a personal anecdote, I watch a lot of food YouTube. So I like good food. I like watching good food be made, and I like being healthy. So do you have general thoughts on the state of the discourse? So we're discussing this in part as there's this weird confluence of political stuff going on, particularly around the recent 2024 elections and RFK Jr.'s role in this. But in general, obviously, this has been a cultural discussion as long as I've been alive, discussing sort of what are food norms, what's available, what are the rules, what's healthiest. Do you want to have a shot at kind of touch points?
Yeah, and I think it's so. At least in the U.S., I think there's this sort of been a little bit of back and forth because there was kind of there was this movement maybe that probably started after the Great Depression, where suddenly we were able to preserve milk and can it and have it for long storage, and all these foods suddenly we were able to can, and that was sort of became a big thing, and a lot of people I think moved in that direction of all these newly processed foods that were the cool new thing, and like vitamin added foods, man-made vitamin added foods were the cool new thing, and then there was kind of a backlash against that, I think, that in a lot of ways aligned with kind of the hippie movement and maybe a more leftist political movement where people were like, let's get back to nature, let's eat natural things. And unfortunately, I think that sort of created this like left-right divide in like the food discourse, which really shouldn't have been there, because everyone was thinking, eating vegetables and like farm raised meat or whatever, that's like a hippie leftist thing, and we're
so just to broadly touch on that point, I think this is a uniquely American problem that
yes.
anything that we deem important, we have to make a political issue of.
Yes. This is definitely it's I don't know that this has happened in any other country, but I think in America for a little bit, sort of healthy eating was deemed as like this leftist thing, and then we've sort of, really, I think only recently we've been coming out of that to where now it's more of a conservative thing, or maybe both, just a broad thing that everyone agrees we should be eating healthier. So we're sort of, I think, recovering from that that sort of hippie, like, I don't know, 70s, 80s movement, whatever that was. So it's, I think, a little bit people are slightly confused about how they should feel, because if you're very right wing, RFK Jr., who was just approved as the Secretary for Health, he's a very leftist guy. And so finding that you align with him very closely on how you should eat, I think a lot of conservatives are like, wait, what is this? What are we doing here? How do we agree with this person?
So to comment on the political side of this, I think we are in a weird moment, even more so than 2016, where both political parties are trying to figure out what they stand for.
Sure.
And there's this readjustment going on. Prior to Barry Goldwater in the 50s and 60s, and then really Ronald Reagan was the success of the Barry Goldwater movement, the Republican Party was not the conservative party. That was really, I think he was senator from Arizona or New Mexico. Barry Goldwater ran for president, I think, in the 1960s. Didn't get close, but really the Republican Party really took after him, and what the Republican Party was up until about 2016 was largely that. And we're in that same kind of realignment moment now for both parties, because if one party realigns itself significantly, the other party gets forced to.
Yeah.
So it's going to be interesting to see how this turns out. But it's cool that it sparks discussions like this, I think.
Yeah. Well, I think it's been nice. I mean, I follow a fair amount of various diet related, food related communities on Reddit. And I mean, Reddit is sort of infamously very left wing. But it's actually been really neat to see people come together and put aside politics and say, you know, we don't really care. You know, the most important thing for us is that RFK is going to get rid of seed oils, which we all hate.
Yeah, so, that's an interesting one.
It's actually been very, very unifying.
Yeah. So another sort of data point I'd like to throw out there from my personal experience has been, I think I became most aware of this around the time I went to college, that I had friends who were into this. I started to see very strongly it with particularly women I went to college with who became mothers, oftentimes got into health food and certain ideas about health food and what constituted healthy food, which all seemed to cluster together. So ideas like, we want non-pasteurized milk, we want grass-fed cattle, we would rather buy it from a farmer 150 miles out that way than at the grocery store. Ideas around things like seed oils, and clearly there was a community, and by this time we had the internet to, create communities like this across great distances, where there was an idea that there were problems with sort of.
And I think some of it simply comes down to freedom and liberty, right? Like people just want the choice to be able to say, if I want to be able to walk into the store and get unpasteurized milk, or, a cow that was butchered by someone who lives 5 miles away. So I think, like, for some people, it's simply having that freedom to be able to choose whether I want Kraft macaroni and cheese or unpasteurized milk. And for other people, like you're saying, I think, they start doing a lot of research and reading into what really is the healthiest, and particularly for mothers, as you are, providing nutrients for a growing child, it becomes very, very important what you're putting in your body. And suddenly it's like, well, I can't have pizza and beer every night like I did in college, because, the baby might not turn out the best. And, I want everything as perfect as I can get it, which means, whatever I've read, whatever balance of, proteins, and whether it's grass-fed meat or unpasteurized milk, or, whatever that may be.
Yeah. So one additional anecdote from earlier in life that I also want to bring to this is that I think there's a lot of realization today that a lot of the health guidance that was being put out, I would say in the post-World War II era, as standardization and bulk manufacturing really took off, a lot of the food guidance was very poor, and honestly based on pretty darn reductive reasoning, which wasn't very well tested. Yeah. So the idea about different kinds of cholesterol, eggs are bad for you.
They've gone from bad to good, bad, good. They flip flop, I think, every 5 years.
Yeah, don't consume whole fat milk. Drink skim milk.
Yeah. Well, and again, this may be, well, I think it started in the US, and then the rest of the world sort of informed itself around what the US was doing. But we had quite a lot of food standards that I think were based off of lobbying, where, someone like, the corn growers would come in and be like, let's have some studies on how corn is super healthy, and, base all of our food pyramid around corn or cornflakes or some derivative that we can sell because our farmers are growing it. And so there's several examples like that where we were basing these health decisions on lobbying efforts by various groups and not on sort of empirical evidence of what actually is going to be healthiest for people.
Yeah, and lest anyone think this is a particularly pernicious example of lobbying, this is how federal government lobbying works in every way, where a lot of times there will be an activist group that works for a nonprofit or a for-profit or something that has assisted a congressman in getting into office, and then there's a bill that relates to what they want to do. Maybe it has to do with selling honey and federal efforts to make honeybees more abundant. The congressman's office will literally have the lobbyist group write a proposal on what regulations or rules should be. And this just happens across the board.
Right. Right.
So yeah, it's
and a lot
happened
of
in the
time
food
that
industry.
that language will go straight into a bill from the lobbyist group, and the congressman might glance over it. Sometimes it's not even the congressman; it'll be some staffer who's like, "Yeah, this looks good. This aligns with Congressman Smith's position," and they check mark it, and then you're good to go.
And for historical context, I also want to bring up, and this is something in my notes for this topic. Farm subsidies in the United States, which are a complex issue, but one of the things that is generally observed is that the EU, the European Union, has much stricter rules for a lot of food products than the US. Okay, so this is also generally true about the EU. There are upsides and downsides to having more bureaucracy and restrictions. The US actually has some pretty significant restrictions around food use. They're just through farm subsidies, not through you can't do X rules. I mean, the farm subsidies to a large extent say you can't do X. They're part of the reason the U.S. produces so freaking much corn. And this is just, you can't fix humans. That's the moral of this story, because the farm subsidies came in the 1930s during the Great Depression in the wake of greedy farmers trying to grow as many expensive crops as they could, causing the Dust Bowl the decade prior, where massive parts of particularly the American South Midwest were farmed to a point where they lost all of their topsoil. It literally just got blown away because the land wasn't being taken care of effectively. And part of the reason we have these pretty stringent farm subsidies, which make a lot of rules about what American farm producers can and can't produce, is because we had greedy farm producers, and the federal government stepped in and said, okay, we're taking control now. Part of the trouble with that is those subsidies have not been substantially revised or removed or reassessed since, scientists and central planning is rarely a good way of making things work. Since scientists and central planners were looking at it almost 100 years ago. So I just want to point back to that as part of the reason why things are the way they are.
Yeah, and now we're going on 3-4 generations of farmers who have been working in this system. And I think that as much as maybe they personally want to change, it's going to be a mammoth effort to redo all of that.
Yeah. And it's going to impact people's livelihoods. It's going to impact the livelihoods of the people producing our food. To change that, even to change it in a good way, you can't change a system like that without somebody hurting.
Yeah.
One other thing I was going to say on this topic, and it has flown my mind. Well, I'm sure it'll come back. So Vani Hari, I want to jump back to her real quick. She's interesting because she was a bright student apparently in school and college, and had this very high paying job in the financial sector before having a personal experience around food. And that's what moved her over to being a food activist. And I just wanted to point to that as I thought interesting. Just an example of the way in which a personal experience can be so much more profound than just the intellectual awareness that something is a certain way. But I thought that was generally something interesting about her. I don't know if you've had something similar occur in your life that turned you into the person you are now.
Crazy
But
health nut.
yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think, well, like I said, going back to Weston Price, his sort of seminal book is called Nutrition and Physical Degeneration. And it is not an easy read. It's like a big, fat, dense book. But we randomly happened to have it in our house, and I happened upon it. I don't think anyone else in our family had ever read it. It was just sort of randomly in our basement. And I distinctly remember I read it. I found it for whatever reason and started reading it. And I think I read the whole thing in a weekend. It was,
wow.
and not because it's easy to read, but just because I found it fascinating that this guy had traveled all over the world and studied all these tribes and sort of come to this idea that we shouldn't eat all this modern processed food. But I don't know if it was like a St. Paul personal experience, but it was, I think, in the sense that I had at that point, I don't know if that was pre-internet days, but it's certainly pre-internet for me. So I had never come across someone who had expressed views anywhere similar to this. And yet, like, everything he wrote made so much logical sense that it was, I don't know, it made a huge impression to me at a young age. And I think that sparked a lot of my sort of curiosity and general interest after that. Just in general, food things, nutrition things, health things. A lot of that was sparked by Weston Price.
So let's hit a few hot food and health topics and try to have a brief, substantive discussion about them. How's that sound? So one thing I want to bring up, because I'm curious if you're aware of this, but this is something I tell people who are interested in health, and this is independent of making recommendations to them. Are you familiar with the different caloric content by weight in between the different macronutrients? So I'm talking here fat, protein, and carbohydrate.
Yes. Generally, yes. Not I couldn't put it down.
So
to
roughly
exact,
speaking,
yeah, roughly.
If you take a pound of basically any carbohydrate or a pound of basically any protein, the caloric content is typically, I don't have the exact numbers pulled up in front of me, but it's between 14 and 1700 calories per pound. Whereas with a pound of fat, you're talking about 3,300 calories, is my understanding.
Right.
Which is kind of wild that this is not better known. I only read about this a couple of years ago. But this explains why you eat McDonald's French fries, which are very high fat content, and you can easily eat a lot more food because your body is just experiencing less fullness from
like volume wise,
the caloric density. Yeah.
I would say this may be a male female thing. But in my experience, a lot of females know that a pound of fat is sort of 3,000 to maybe 3,500 calories. Because if you read really any diet advice or popular magazines or whatever, that's how much you need to budget in order to lose a pound of fat. So
interesting. Okay.
That part, at least, I think, is in the popular culture to a certain extent.
Yeah, this also makes me wonder a little bit about Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice, who famously asks for a pound of flesh. And I won't spoil the story. It's 500 years old, so go watch or read Shakespeare. But the actual content of that pound of flesh actually comes to matter a lot. So okay, so just wanted to throw that out there. Let's run down a couple of things in terms of health and food contents. A couple of things I want to talk about are food additives, artificial sweeteners, food colorings and what are called natural flavors.
Mhm.
So, first off, artificial sweeteners, I'm a big fan. I like aspartame. It is my preferred artificial sweetener. I like Diet Coke. I like Diet Dr. Pepper. Um, since Diet Pepsi has switched to, I think, primarily sucralose, I don't like the taste. Um, and aspartame is one of those things that I've had my health conscious friends for years telling me, "Oh, you can't eat aspartame. That's so bad for you." And I've yet to see actual studies, and I've read a lot of scientific studies in grad school and for some of the jobs I've been in. I have yet to see conclusive scientific studies indicating significant health harms from aspartame. So this is me
Yeah.
putting my foot
Yeah,
down,
I think
saying
we
you.
have a shared Diet Coke, Diet Dr. Pepper thing from our childhood. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, the big thing that I've come across a lot is people say, well, don't drink diet soda because then mentally you'll give yourself a pass to have more sugar later, which I just personally, I've never found that to be the case. And that may happen for some people. It has never, ever happened for me. So it doesn't, like, people are like, oh, it'll wake your cravings for actual soda. I hate actual soda. So yeah,
yeah,
that may just be a personal experience thing. And like you, I mean, I wouldn't say like Diet Coke is a health food.
yeah.
But
And the other thing I want to bring up on this is you can feed everybody should know this. You can give enough of anything to a person and it will kill them. Enough water will kill you. So that the idea that you can overdose um, animal test subjects or humans on any product is not an indication
yeah,
that the thing should not be ingested in any amount.
yeah.
And I want to generally make that criticism against some of the food activism, including some of the things Vani says around using words like man-made products or things out of the ground. She in the interview I listened to, she said something about we need to get back to eating things out of the ground, but then she also um, has a strong aversion to anything derived from petroleum,
Hmm.
from crude oil. Crude oil comes out of the ground. Um, Salt comes out of the ground. So yeah, you're going to eat salt out of the ground, but not petroleum out of the ground. Um, I have a little bit of an issue with this kind of reasoning. The fact that humans are doing something to a thing we got ultimately out of the ground. Everything comes out of the ground or out of the air or out of the water. We don't synthesize out of nothing. That in itself is not, to me, a sufficient reason to say something should or shouldn't be eaten. Do
Sure.
you have thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think yeah, I think it's something I don't know. This is sort of veering into personal philosophy that I don't necessarily have a lot of scientific backing for. Um, but I think when you're considering any of these things, like, should I make this a substantial part of my diet or not? Um, that sort of out of the ground argument, um, I think is something you would sort of put on if you're making a column of, yes or no. You would put it on a yes, this is good. It came straight from the ground. But I don't think, like you're saying, I don't think you should base your whole argument on it. It would be a factor that you look at, but that shouldn't be the only thing you're looking at when you're making a decision of, is this healthy or not to put in my body?
Yeah. Um, and sort of a more general comment also related to this is I wanted to touch on sort of the idea of food activism in general. In the interview I heard, Vani Hari doesn't actually understand human biology and food science at a deep level. Like I was saying, she makes some claims about certain things being good or bad, which sort of contradict each other.
Mhm.
And yet she's a food activist. She's going out and talking to Congress people and business people and trying to influence decisions. And I think I would probably say largely for the good.
Yeah.
Um, it just made it struck me as interesting that we need people who are both good at figuring out the real problems and the real solutions. Like I've never heard of Weston Price, but we need people like Weston Price, but we also, I think, probably need people like Vani Hari.
Yeah.
To
Well, I
actually,
think
yeah.
this is something, I don't know. I've run into this a lot with different food activists. Oftentimes, they, they were not in this field to begin with. They got into this field because they got sick, a family member got sick, a kid got sick, and they started investigating on their own. And I think a lot of times what happens is, and not like they're doing bad investigation, but whatever they find sort of pertains to them and their circumstance. So, like Vani Harriet, I think one of her big things was dyes in different foods, like red, whatever it is, red dye,
40.
red dye 640, yeah.
Uh,
And I mean, not that that's good for everybody or anybody, but I think there's some people that will affect disproportionately. And so if you're one of those people, you may like cut that out of your diet and have like massive success. And then someone else who it just doesn't affect as much will cut it out of their diet and go, well, I didn't notice anything different.
yeah.
And I think this happens a lot, and probably goes back to what you were talking about very early on is, genetically, we're all coming from different backgrounds. And so our bodies have different tolerances for things and different preferences for different sets of nutrients. And so, as we're going through all of these nutritional things, it's going to hit everybody slightly different based on, are they Asian? Are they African? Are they Scandinavian? What is the rest of their lifestyle like? And I think that it sort of increases the level of confusion among people as well, because you'll get people saying, well, I cut out seed oils and it had this massive effect on everything in my life. And then other people will cut out seed oils and it'll be like, well, that barely moved the needle at all. And it doesn't really help that everyone has slightly different personal experiences to different things, and everyone's kind of coming away with different ideas of like what the ideal diet is.
Yeah, what you're saying resonates with me. I've definitely had that experience where I've had friends say, hey, I did this health thing and it just changed my life dramatically.
Yeah.
And it'll be something that I'll have been able to have some kind of, somewhat analogous experience to, and be like, not here.
Well, I mean, like recently, zero carb has been probably the biggest thing over the past few years. Everyone getting into keto of different kinds of keto and no carb or low carb or whatever it is. And I think, again, it depends a lot on your genetic background and your lifestyle, like what level of carbs are going to be beneficial for you. And you might be able to take a plan off the internet or, from some influencer, and it might sort of accidentally fit exactly what you need. But chances are you're going to need to like basically experiment on yourself and figure out like what level of this is actually preferential for my own body.
Yep. So on this topic, I also want to say, you mentioned lifestyle has to come into the picture there. And for the last 6 years, roughly, I've been fairly serious doing amateur cycling. And I have gone on rides where I've burned up to in the area of 8,000 or 9,000 calories. When you're doing a significant amount of aerobic activity, you cannot fuel that at high intensity with anything except carbohydrates.
Sure.
That's it. So you'll see in the serious aerobic communities, the whole health push of the last 10 years, and this has actually led to dramatic increase in abilities, both at the amateur and professional levels. All of the experimentation has been, how can I mix sugars and ingest them to consume the most calories possible within a given amount of time? Like, that's the fight. And right now we're up to the point where they're pushing professional athletes doing big races like the Tour de France or Ironmans or so forth. They're consuming in the area of 700 calories an hour of a mix of sugars that the body can actually convert to usable blood sugar in different channels at the same time, just to maximize that. And those are the people winning those events. So I think this is acknowledged even by the low carb, a lot of the low carb people, to achieve high performance over an extended period. Carbohydrates are the way to do it.
Sure.
So I do want to throw that out there. And lifestyle, this is actually something I wanted to ask about is, do you feel like you've seen health outcomes or the health of the general population change within your lifetime? Because I have lived through the rise of the internet. I've seen the internet come. I've seen cell phones come. Now I'm watching AI come. And all these are dramatically lifestyle impacting technologies.
I mean, I guess my general sense is that it's gone down. But I'm not sure if that's because as I've gotten older and more interested in health and nutrition, that I'm paying more attention to it now than I was maybe 10 years ago. Or if it's because it has actually gone down. I'd probably have to sit and think about that to really come up with a good answer there.
Yeah. I think one anecdote, it's not really an anecdote, but in answering this question, it's an anecdote, is it was really interesting to see the dramatic drop in life expectancy that happened during the COVID lockdowns.
Yeah.
Basically, between the start of 2020 and the end of 2022, in the US, life expectancy, I think particularly for men, dropped something like 3 years. So that's an interesting indicator. But I think one of the things that's going to throw like large scale analysis of this kind of question into turmoil is our population pyramid is just so weird right now in the developed world that doing health outcomes and not accounting for population base and the age and number of people you're testing is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
But also one thing I think is affecting lifestyle is also that age pyramid. The fact that we have so many people in their 60s and 70s, more people in their 60s and 70s than in their 20s and 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And the sort of median and mode ages of the population are going to affect what you're able to do and what's popular.
Sure. Yeah. And I guess I would say, so I have a fair amount of experience with that kind of baby boomer generation and the lifestyle they were living. And I think, unfortunately, they tend to take government guidelines maybe more seriously than the younger generations. Right? I think younger generations, my generation, our generation and younger, tend to be a little more skeptical and a little more willing to say, well, yeah, the government says this, but I'm going to do some research on my own and figure out, maybe I want to tweak things. I think the older generation is more inclined to just take whatever the government sort of nutrition standards are and run with that. And particularly the older generations that are in any kind of senior living or assisted living, they really don't have that much of a choice in what they are eating. And unfortunately, a lot of times it's not, I mean, it's not like terrible food, but it's based off of, I think, very outdated government standards on nutrition, which are really not the best. And yeah, I don't know how that's going to sort of skew their, you know, their ultimately, I think that will skew that, like, all of their data, because yeah, I don't know, they're working in a bad system essentially, and they can't get out of it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And here's another place I'm going to make a general comment. The West, particularly the United States, has seen so little social turmoil since the end of the Second World War. You can call some of the conniptions of the 1970s social turmoil, but in some ways, I think they were a reversion to a pre existing social trend. A lot of systems in the US, like the food system, like the FDA, like food producers, have been unbothered for 90 years by any significant pushback or need to dramatically reinvent themselves. And this just tends to happen in human systems as things decay.
Mm-hmm.
That if you're not constantly being forced to reinvent, and it's almost impossible to force yourself to reinvent, you need some kind of external motivator. Everybody just ends up sort of leading whatever work they're doing. They're just kind of managing a steady decay, and I think I'm going to attribute that as one of the fundamental causes as well of some of what we're seeing, and maybe why we're getting to a point where a larger number of people are saying, hey, this is really not okay. Yeah. So I'd like to throw 3 health topics at you, and you tell me your thoughts and whether this is food related.
Sure.
Asthma, antidepressants, and Adderall.
Oh, all together.
Yeah, it's just yes or no.
All in one person. Oh, yeah, yes, but like with different qualifications. So I would argue that probably for all 3 of those, nutrition plays some amount of blame, or however you want to phrase it. Yeah, but it's hard to say how much nutrition plays into those, and again, I would tend to say it probably depends on your genetics to a certain extent, how much your nutrition will predispose you to asthma or depression or hyperactivity. I would argue, particularly for depression, I think a lot of that has to do with other psychological factors apart from nutrition. And that's not to say nutrition doesn't play a piece in that, but I think that's slightly different from the other 2.
Have you heard of Tony Robbins?
Maybe.
He's like a motivational speaker, life coach kind
yes,
of guy.
yes, yeah.
So I'd heard his name, but I had never watched any of his material or heard him talk. And he's another person I listened to an interview of recently. There are a lot of people I listen to interviews of where I'll get half an hour in and I'll say, okay, I know what this person has to say, and just shut it off. But I made it through the Tony Robbins one. He's interesting on this point around antidepressants. He said he increasingly thinks the consensus is coming around to the idea that these don't work, basically. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but the amount of prescribed antidepressants in the US is insane.
It's massive. Yes, and I think there is a lot of placebo effect going on there, where the doctor says, well, this will make you feel better, and then, hey, it kind of does. I don't know. I haven't. Antidepressants and nutrition is not something I've looked into massively. So yeah, I would kind of fall back on, I think maybe that has to do with other sort of environmental and cultural issues apart from nutrition.
Yeah.
But
On the antidepressant issue, I have done a fair amount of research, but mostly around their effects on athletic performance.
Mhm.
Because a lot of them, especially the older ones, are effectively reuptake inhibitors, where when the brain produces certain chemicals that are, and this was the theory behind developing these in the first place, say dopamine, which is a positive chemical in theory in the brain. The body has to have a way to reabsorb dopamine once it's been released. And so some of the early antidepressants, they literally block the body's ability to reabsorb dopamine.
right. So it
But then,
keeps running around in your bloodstream and you maintain happiness for longer,
yeah,
theoretically.
that's the theory behind it.
Yeah.
But then, yeah. Okay. Well, I don't have firm thoughts on antidepressants. Just that it seems like they're prescribed a lot, and they're all psychoactive drugs. That's kind of scary to me. I don't want to be taking something that changes my brain chemistry substantially for a long time.
Yeah,
Which
that's something I would probably try like all my other avenues before I was like, yes, give me the brain altering chemicals.
Yeah. And this actually reminds me of something that is related to what I just asked around asthma, antidepressants, and Adderall. Asthma and Adderall, I'm mostly talking about like use in kids, or use of asthma, prevalence of childhood asthma,
Yeah.
and use of Adderall. And this is something I want to give Vani Hari credit for. Is I don't know how much this is instinct or how much this is thought through. When the human body and brain are in development, you have to be much, much more careful about what you give it.
Sure.
So an adult human can abuse alcohol for a long time and see relatively minor consequences. A child cannot abuse alcohol for any significant amount of time at all before seeing major life-changing consequences.
Yeah. And permanent changes that.
Yep. Yep. So the same goes for, it's going to be true for bad food or medications that are potentially brain chemistry altering.
Well, and this was the thing with lead paint and leaded gasoline, that adults can be exposed to a fair amount of lead, and we will eventually, like, we'll store it in our bodies and eventually get rid of it. And kids, it will permanently mess them up, which is why we don't have lead paint anymore. We have unleaded gas.
Interesting. I was not aware. And just one more anecdote. It's not really an anecdote. One more thing I wanted to throw out and give some credit to the Obamas is a couple years ago, I was watching this channel. I think I was overseas at the time and was like just missing America. And so I was just watching like Americana kind of stuff. So I was watching this channel, which was just comparing American school lunches. And the channel was really targeted for kids. But I found it interesting where this episode was maybe half an hour long, and it was presenting kids with school lunches from the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, the 1950s. And to me, it was shocking at how you could just watch the decline in food quality just dramatically right through the year 2000, basically. Yeah. And then only once you're into the 2000s do you actually start to see some positive changes. But it like went off a cliff in the 1970s, the quality of food that kids were being given.
Yeah.
And also it shifted heavily carbohydrate. Yeah.
Until fairly recently, I did not believe what they were feeding kids in school. Because so for the listeners, we did not go to school, so I have no idea like what public school kids ate, except through like you'd see, on TV shows or cartoons or whatever, you'd see these examples of school lunches, and I thought it was a made up thing because I was like, "There's no way they're feeding kids like that horrible stuff, and the kids are not complaining." So it was only when I was adult and I, talked to other adults who went to public school and they were like, oh yeah, that's real. Like we had, plain pasta and, chocolate milk every day. And that was just normal, which, that's shocking to me.
Do you have thoughts on processed food in general?
Um, so in general, I think my general thought would be, from what I've read, and probably personal experience in this as well, I think it is easier for the body to break down and absorb nutrients from less processed things than from processed things. So, I mean, you can get into all sorts of arguments about processed food causing cancer and, a whole variety of, autism and all other things. But just looking at, on a basic nutrient level, I'm going to have an easier time absorbing protein from a steak than from a protein shake. And I think, at least from the studies I've seen, I think that is fairly well established, that we absorb sort of natural nutrients better than man-made nutrients.
Yeah. So this is not a counterpoint, but one thing I want to put out there is canning itself typically does not involve loss of food quality. So canned foods, I actually looked into this back in the day when one of my favorite snacks was canned green beans when I was trying to be healthy, and canned green beans actually basically retain all the nutrients you would get in fresh green beans. As far as I'm aware, that generally tends to be the case. That canning is not what I would consider a processing step. Sure. Basically,
yeah. And same with freezing, which I think a lot of people make the mistake that frozen food is bad or canned food is bad, and that's not necessarily true. It might be true if they start adding a bunch of sugar or something else to it. But
so one consideration I want to throw out there to agree with what you're saying about food processing, just generally it's harder to get healthy food if it's more processed, is once you're processing food down into a bar or some kind of shape or something, you immediately are forced as a manufacturer, as a producer, to be very concerned in weight and content. And when you're looking at healthy foods, being able to include a large proportion of quality protein in a protein-based processed food becomes very expensive in the processed form. And so you immediately start throwing fillers in. So you look at a Slim Jim, and theoretically a Slim Jim should be mostly protein and some fat, but actually there's a lot of carbs in there because there's a lot of filler. So I think providing some of the healthier foods like greens, think about most greens, most fruits have a huge amount of water content and have a significant structure. If you took a healthy salad and ground it down into something that you could then put on a grocery store shelf as a salad bar, like the thing would be tiny and weigh almost nothing. Once you take all the water out and you crush it. So then you're almost forced as a salesperson to fill it up with something to make it more substantial. And what's cheap? Potato dust. And as much plastic additive as we're allowed to have in there.
Well, and I think this is something that I think it's just sort of impossible for humans to understand, because I mean, like I know this, intellectually, and yet when I go to buy dried fruit or jerky, I'm always like, it's crazy expensive. But it's not if you think about the actual amount of fruit or meat that it originally came from. It's not crazy expensive, but the size of it makes you think it is crazy expensive.
I buy steak, but I don't buy jerky.
Yeah,
jerky's
so
so expensive.
I intellectually stand there and go, it's not expensive. Think of like buying a bag of apricots and then this teeny little bag of apricots. It makes sense. But so yeah, I get that they're trying to overcome that basic human instinct of looking at something and going, it's so tiny. That's not enough. And I don't think you can ever really overcome that, because it's just such a basic human thing to go, I want more volume.
Yeah. Okay. I would like, before we jump to a quick Wiki Roulette, do you have any significant current rules you live by when it comes to food and health practices?
Um, mm, Probably. Well, I don't know. I think there are a lot of things I try to do, but maybe the biggest one is, and this is maybe more of a personal thing. Um, I have a tendency to try and go all or nothing,
Hmm.
and sort of cold turkey things. And so I constantly try to tell myself, like, any amount of improvement in diet or nutrition is worth doing. So even if you are going, well, I'm eating 80% pizza and ice cream, what's the point of doing 20% salads? Like, it is like, there is a point in doing that 20, if you can do 20% good stuff, like that is
Hmm.
still hugely beneficial. So like, don't get stuck in the trap, and particularly like beginning of the year, everyone likes to make resolutions, and
Resolutions, yeah.
and usually by this point they've all failed,
Oh yeah. Oh
because
yeah. Third week in
we're
January,
we're
you're pretty
six
good
weeks
if you made
in.
it that far.
Those are gone.
Yeah.
But like, don't get into that trap of thinking of like, oh well, I failed, I'm just going to go all out and not do anything. Because
Okay.
like, any amount of improvement, even if it's like 5% improvement, I think can have massive uh, down the road impacts on your health.
Yep.
So
So for me, the biggest things I do are I basically don't eat until I'm hungry in a day, and I'm never hungry when I wake up. Um,
that's a huge thing. I'm glad you
yeah.
said that, because yeah, for years, well, all growing up, there was this thing of like, oh, eat breakfast like a king, like eat food right when you get up so you're fueled for the day. And I never understood that, because I was never hungry when
Yeah.
I woke up. Uh,
And
yeah.
and I know some people are hungry when they get up. For me, my biggest meal is dinner, and I like to eat dinner maybe an hour before I go to bed. And of course, people are going to tell you, "Oh, that's unhealthy." Whatever. Go to Spain. That they all do that.
At 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
that's not an
Yeah.
exaggeration. Like the restaurants don't open until 7:30.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and
Uh,
I think that goes back to, we've touched on this several times, of like, just get to know what works for you. Don't be like, well, I have to eat 3 meals because that's what works for a lot of people. Or,
mhm.
there was this thing for a while where people were like, oh, you have to like have a snack every 2 or 3 hours because that keeps your blood sugar steady or whatever. I'm sure some people do have to do that, but don't just accept things because you read it worked somewhere for some person.
Yeah,
Like, experiment on yourself and listen to your own body and what you are
yeah.
inclined to do, and like, don't be afraid to be like, oh, I only eat 2 meals a day. Um, if that works
So
for you, that works.
yeah, the other thing I'll say that I do that I'm very consistent about is about 8-ish years ago, I completely cut added sugars out of my diet, starting with coffee, which I had already always drunk sweetened up until then. And then it just extended over everything else. I just don't crave sugar in food anymore. I did initially. It was really
Mhm.
hard the first few weeks with the coffee. It took about 3 weeks. And this, I think, is also partly a male female thing. I think uh, because of biological differences, men are just wired to not crave sweets as much. But I just basically don't eat, yeah, things with sugar in them, added beyond the point of the
Yeah.
natural sugar contained in the thing. I don't even really eat fruits or drink fruit juice, except for grapefruit juice. So that's just another me thing.
Missing out on all those fruit nutritions. Pretty sure there's
I
part of the
guess so.
food pyramid that's all fruit.
The food pyramid. Excellent. Okay, so let's talk favorite foods. Give one. I'll give one.
I
And, I mean, we can give more than one. I just want to.
Well, after all this discussion of of eating healthy
Yeah.
and added sugars, I really do like ice cream. Um,
Okay.
but I
I
think
really
that
like pizza.
it extends to all dairy,
Okay.
cheese, milk. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah,
I was not into cheese until I was in my 20s. And yeah, I really appreciate cheese of a variety of different sorts now. Kraft mac and cheese is great. but also a nice, French smelly cheese. Also cool.
No smelly cheese, but
Okay.
I like pretty much any hard cheese. I like goat cheese.
Okay.
Might be the
Your
only
goat cheese
one,
that
but,
you've made is amazing.
well, yeah, I'm partial to that. So,
So I'll go with pizza. I love pizza. I almost never eat it, but yeah, and it doesn't need to be a fancy pizza. Costco pizza is famously my favorite pizza.
Pizza's really good.
Do you have another one? Another category?
Another category. This is, I think, our German heritage. I really like liver sausage.
Man, I don't know if I've ever had it or.
Well, so Braunschweiger would be like the most typical one, but there's some other ones as well. And I also like regular liver and onions, like liver, onions, and bacon. Really, really good.
Okay. I'm going to take this as a tip. I'm going to try this now. I was in Bavaria not long ago and found myself eating a lot of Weisswurst. That's nice.
Yeah, sausage in general I like, and again, well, this is like the goat cheese. I can make my own sausage, so I'm very partial to it.
You know how the sausage is made?
Yes. But
okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll throw another one out there, which is kitfo. Are you familiar with kitfo?
We went to a Nigerian place?
Ethiopian
place? Ethiopian. Yes.
Ethiopian, yeah. So it's really unique. For those who don't know, most Ethiopian food is eaten with a pancake, not with utensils, but it's a really unique pancake because it's slightly sour and very moist and thin. The place we went to, Veronica, that was more a little bit Americanized. Okay. Typically, the pancake is thinner and less spongy. Well, it is spongy, but thinner and moist. But then kitfo is ground raw beef in spiced butter, mixed in spiced butter. And typically it's served with a few sides, some in-house made cheese, some collard greens, some peas, and you tear off a piece of the pancake. You grab some of the side, you grab some of the meat, you put it in your mouth.
Nice.
Anyway, so kitfo is high on my list.
Well,
any other?
I mean, going off that, I like. I don't know if there's a term for this, like Europeanized Mediterranean food. Like shawarma would be the main one. But particularly if you go to Germany, maybe the Netherlands as well. Like a lot of their street food has Turkish origins.
Doner kebab.
Yes, they're donors, which I think is delicious. I mean, I like Greek food in general, but specifically the variety of Greek food that has been like Europeanized.
Gotcha.
Whatever the term for it is. Yeah.
I do eat that fairly often. That kind of food. One last thing I'll throw out is sushi. I'm a big fan of sushi.
Sushi is really good.
I'm talking raw fish predominantly, not like the rolls with all kinds of flavorings, not fusion stuff so much. I'm talking straight up traditional Japanese sushi.
I like the rolls too, and I will eat not the gas station ones, but I will eat regular grocery store sushi. Well, I mean, grocery stores near me do fairly good, like actual raw sushi, and there's a sushi chef there, so it's pretty decent. So.
Yep, I have sushi waiting for me to eat for dinner tonight. So
that's Penitential Friday.
It's tough. Okay, let's hop into a quick wiki roulette if you are game, and
go for it.
Bum bum bum. Tech skills. Wiki roulette. All right, we get 3 shots. Shot number 1, Dryptosaurus. We got a dinosaur.
Dinosaurs. I think we have to go with dinosaurs.
Okay, sounds good. Do you want to read the first paragraph-ish here?
Dryptosaurus is a genus of
Tyrannosaurian theropod. It's just Tyrannosaurian with a U in front.
That one. Tyrannosaurian. Yeah, Tyrannosaurian theropod dinosaur that lived on the island continent of Appalachia. Oh, it's from here.
Dude, this is our hometown dino.
My backyard. Just, 67 million years ago during the end of the Maastrichtian age in the late Cretaceous period. So, not that long ago. There could be a fossil in my backyard. It's a large bipedal ground-dwelling carnivore. Could grow up to 25 feet long and 1,667 to 3,307 pounds. I love how like these old dinosaurs, they're just like, we have no idea, somewhere within this 2,000-pound range.
Yeah. On this bipedal thing, there's a part of me that's very suspicious. I think paleontologists have gotten more modest in recent years, but there's a part of me that's very suspicious about reconstructions of dinosaurs. I think the fossil record is so abundant at this point that the reconstruction of this skeletal remains is probably pretty accurate, but like actually predicting from that what the animal looked like, like,
yeah, you
have
see
you seen
some
a
of this
human
stuff
skull?
where they're like yeah,
Reconstruct a human face from a human skull if you've never seen the face.
yeah. Oh, this is cool. It came from New Jersey.
Yeah. So, yeah, a few different things about this. One of my favorite dinosaur facts, I'm a guy, I have to have dinosaur facts, is that dinosaurs were around substantially longer than humans have been around. That's crazy to me. They were around and then they left.
Yeah.
Or were gone. Another thing that's cool about dinosaurs is it is widely accepted today that the cutout of the Yucatan Peninsula corresponds to a massive meteor hitting the Earth, and that being the cause, the primary cause of the extinction of the dinosaurs. That theory, that was like a conspiracy theory when I was a kid in school. Like no serious science people held that theory, and now everybody does. Which to me is kind of fascinating.
That's why
to see that shift
Bermuda
in my
Triangle
lifetime.
is there too. It's still messed up.
Huh. Let's see if there's anything else here. Teeth, blah, blah, blah.
This is sort of tangential from dinosaurs, but when I saw Appalachia, because we're near the Appalachian Mountains.
Yeah, I can see the Appalachian Mountains out my window. You were on an Appalachian mountain.
Part of the reason why people were like so fascinated with the New World when they discovered it was there were so many different species and fossils that were found here. And a lot of that is because when we had the last ice age, if you imagine the globe and you imagine the ice caps coming from sort of north and south towards the equator.
Yep.
In North America, because our mountain ranges, the Appalachians and the Rockies, run roughly north to south, as the ice caps came down,
they isolated.
Well, everything was sort of able to move in front of it. So we didn't have a lot of species go extinct. Versus in Europe and Asia, their mountains run sort of east to west. And so when the ice caps came down, everything was sort of stuck against the Alps. So they had so many more species go extinct, like relatively to here. So when people came to the New World, and specifically when they started looking at the Appalachians, and this is part of what fueled Jefferson sending out expeditions to like explore things and find new species, is everyone was like, there's 15 different kinds of oak here, because there are only like 2 in Europe, because all the rest of them had been extinct since the Ice Age. So I don't know. It's just sort of fascinating. Whenever I see the Appalachians, I'm like, oh yeah, ours run north to south, and that's why we have so many more species than the Europeans and Asians do.
That's something I'm going to have to think about more. I just wanted to finish with this picture from Chamonix. That's the village down in the bottom, but Mont Blanc is the mountain there. This is the highest mountain in Europe, basically, which France and Italy decided to draw a border directly across the top of, so both of them get to have the highest mountain in Europe. But I've been here, and I love this. This is one of my favorite places I've ever been. But you can see the glacier on top of Mont Blanc, And there's a cool observatory on the top of the opposite mountain where this photo is taken from. I've hiked up both of them, not all the way up Mont Blanc. Like once you get on onto the glacier cap, you need real mountaineering gear, which I didn't have. But there's a really neat graphic showing reconstructions of what the valley looked like during different times in the past, and there being at one stage in one of the ice ages where the valley is like 2/3 high, just glacier. Which is just wild when you go back and look at it now. Well, Veronica, anything else to add today?
There's a marathon that is run around Mont Blanc every year.
Cool fact.
Yeah. Actually, I think there's a couple. It's like the Alpine Marathon Championships that run around there. They do like a circle around the base or something.
Yeah. The area is very remote. To get there, so I flew into, I think, Nice. The last like hour and 20 minutes of driving to get to this. No, this wasn't as bad. I'm thinking of further north in the Alps. Yeah, this isn't too bad to get to.
This is making me think of
go visit.
Our James Bond episode of him just like skiing down this mountain to.
Yeah, well, I was thinking of this trip and another one as I was reading that. All right. Well, good talking to you, Veronica.
All right. We'll talk to you next time.
Sounds good.